I think fecal transplant should be quote unquote standard of care. What's your thoughts on that?
Well, it's a tap dance, right? There's no FDA approval for FMT, right? Like, it's kind of Wild West. That's a research use only space, and doctors, that's why you're a physician. In that space, you get to make those decisions, right? So FMT doesn't have any guideline or FDA approval for fecal transplant.
Right.
And so that space, if you read the science, my personal opinion, I would agree with you.
Welcome to Prescribed by Dr. Nathan Goodyear, where integrative oncology meets holistic healing. This podcast is your home for the latest in innovation, exploration, and elevation in all areas of integrative oncology, medicine, health, wellness, and beyond. Join me and a host of other innovators as we go from practicing to prescribing. Your daily dose of wellness begins now.
Welcome today to another Prescribed by Dr. Nathan Goodyear podcast, and I'm really excited. It's going to be a little bit of a different angle today. I'm going to bring somebody actually from the pharmaceutical industry. Now, you know me, I love natural, I love holistic, I love integrative. That's where I like to be. And honestly, I believe that's where the science is. And so you may go, Dr. Goodyear, what are you doing bringing somebody in from the pharmaceutical industry? Well, let me tell you, we need them, okay? What I always say is you walk outside, if you break a hip, you don't need more vitamin D. You need the advancement of surgery to help. And so we need the implants. We need all of that availability. But this gentleman, he's become a friend. We've never met in person. It's only been through emails and Zooms and texts. But I think you're going to really like him because he brings a vast amount of experience from the pharmaceutical industry, but it's one that I believe is very, very integrative. And this company he works for, I have been very blown away. I think they are quite integrative. So let me go ahead and give you kind of the bio of Ty Griffin. He's an Associate Director, Strategic Accounts of Microbiome at Ferring Pharmaceuticals. You need to check them out. He's an experienced pharmaceutical industry leader specializing in strategic healthcare partnerships. I think that word's important. Advancements in microbiome-based therapeutics. So this has been his wheelhouse. Deep expertise in driving adoption and strategic account growth for innovative therapies. That's exactly what you would describe fecal transplant as. He plays a role in expanding access to the product that Ferring Pharmaceutical makes. It's called Microbiota. That is the standard out there in the conventional world from fecal transplant. It's a product that's available. It's a base therapy, US FDA-approved therapy for prevention and recurrent Clostridium difficile infection in adults. That's that bacteria that causes diarrhea, typically following antibiotics. He educates multidisciplinary teams across and about clinical impacts of microbiota restoration, optimizing patient outcomes, and strengthening the adoption of microbiome-focused care strategies. He improves patient care through evidence-based innovation, cross-functional collaboration, and deep understanding. Ty, man, it's exciting. I'm excited to have you on here because I think you bring an incredible background, and we cross in the stool. It's really weird, but welcome to the podcast, dude.
Yeah, thank you. I'm so excited and blessed to be here. I'm so blessed to have met you.
We hadn't met. We've only met digitally.
It's been true. But I feel like
you made me AI. I made me AI, so we don't know.
I've seen you on my phone so much that I feel like we're buddies. But yes. And I've just been so intrigued with, your approach and your knowledge. And I at my core we're on the same page, believe it or not, even though you would think, industry's always been this cat and dog relationship with medicine. And, doctors always think that, we're there to just sell you something. And I've never understood in my 30 years of industry as why we're not a part of like a care team and a path. Like, we want to help, we want to put things out there that, a tool that you can use at your discretion that fits your patients and patient types, And so, thank you. I am excited
Well,
to.
Ty, go ahead. Finish.
So I'm excited to get into this because this is not only my job, but it's my passion. I live this every day. The microbiome is where I believe is the biggest blind spot in medicine. I believe it was Dr. Armin Zergani out of France that actually coined that phrase. But to me, I believe it at my core. I mean, it is kind of the missing link to almost every metabolic disease in the body is the gut microbiome.
Dare I say you believe it in your gut?
I do. It's a gut instinct.
I do. And, it's the blind spot that's down under. So we can keep playing, with those all we want to. But, what I'd like to start off with is, and this is where I think, first of all, there's many different aspects that I think we align, but there's a crisis of trust in healthcare today. There was this Journal of American Medical Association online survey that was published late 2024, I believe it was, and they showed that only 40% of patients trust doctors and trust hospitals. Mm-hmm. Now, I didn't see that they had pharmaceutical in there, but it was a massive fall off a cliff over the last prior 10 years, I think it was. Mm-hmm. But so we got this crisis of trust, and I'm on social media a lot, and because I like to educate patients just like you, right. And I notice how practitioners and scientists engage with non-practitioners and non-scientists. They talk down to them, and I don't see how that helps the trust. Do you see that from your perspective? Because you're actually in the pharmaceutical industry. Is there an awareness of a trust crisis?
Absolutely. And I think that, one, I think it's the fact that diseases are escalating, right? Like we're seeing, and actually in the U.S., our age of mortality is actually declining. And so I think that trust is part of the result of why, you see those stand up for cancer things at basketball games and everything. 20 years ago, maybe one or two people stand up, but now almost the entire arena stands up. We all know someone with cancer. We all know someone with an autoimmune condition. Why is that? I mean, pharma's been around for 200 years. What have we cured? And so someone's got to start asking tough questions, and it's not meant to put people on the defensive or start this, total bitter rivalry. It's let's question what we're doing. Maybe we're doing things wrong. Let's look for the answers. It starts with tough questions, and sometimes tough questions can turn people off. And I think that's the problem in medicine. I feel for doctors, right? They're in the trenches every day. They're trying to help patients. But the system, the industrial complex has just shifted. They don't have the time. They really can't be gumshoes anymore. They can't go out. Everything's kind of protocolized. The insurance companies, the PBMs, they want to set a standard for everyone. Look, if you present with this, you get this first, you get that second. And we're all snowflakes, right? We're all a fingerprint. I mean, everyone's different. It's kind of hard to say that you get this disease, then this is what we do. We should be letting doctors be doctors. We trained them to go out there and think for themselves. Let them go and soap a patient and really spend the time to get to the bottom of what the cause is. I think we're so reactionary now. It's like, oh, if you get AFib, we just do an ablation. Well, why'd you get AFib in the first place? Let's find out what led up to that disease, and then we can move forward from there, I think. And I think that's why I'm so passionate about this gut microbiome space, because there's just a ton of data out there, and the quality of the data could be argumentative, right? There's not a lot of we're so used from pharma industry, large double-blind, randomized, controlled trials. In the microbiome, it's a lot more case report, case study. Yeah. There's not any big pharma money behind it per se. Most of the studies are done in foreign countries where there's no bias on that because it wasn't funded by some big company that was looking for that angle. Most of it starts from someone questioning and just wanting to know what's this mean? And so,
a couple of things, Ty, and I think that was all great. I think it was fantastic, actually. I think we as doctors, and honestly, I think pharmaceuticals as well, we have an obligation. Now, pharmaceutical companies would say, well, we have an obligation to our stockholders, to our board. Well, don't they have an obligation to patients? And I would say when we as doctors, really, the stockholders are the patients.
Right.
And so we as an industry, that is in the pharmaceutical industry, in the innovative industry, which is where you are with Ferring Pharmaceutical, and we as doctors, we don't exist without the patients.
Right.
Like, and so the problem in education in medical school is that it's more of an indoctrination, I would say, because it teaches people how to think. So it teaches people what to think, not how to think. So it creates a conformity of thought rather than encouraging critical thinking. So you're right, we need to allow doctors to be doctors, but the education system really has moved away from that now for quite some time. Right. I think we need to step back a little bit, and we need to recognize, hey, people say, well, medicine is an equal blend of art and science. And I would say, yeah, and as a doctor, a practitioner of medicine, it's an equal blend of clinician and scientist. And so, and we've moved away from that. We've completely moved away from that. And I think we need to come back to that. And I don't know how we do that, but I think that's something that would help to restore, I think, doctors' connection to the science and application, because I think we got to rebuild trust. And you have a history of collaborating and joining different people from different backgrounds, which I think, moves like that and experience like that help to build trust. And we desperately need that right now.
And I think exactly right. And I think that's where integrative functional medicine's kind of leading that charge, right? They're the space that it's been like, hey, I don't want conveyor belt medicine. I don't want conveyor belt patient care. I don't want conveyor belt treatment options. They're the ones that are stepping out and they're critical thinking, and they're stepping out there. And the problem is we need to embrace that instead of ostracize that. Or because sometimes you'll think allopathic medicine, or might say, and sorry for the term, but they'd be like, God, they're quacks, they're out, it's quackery, but God, you can't argue with the results. And I can see where academic looks at that and they say, well, that was one patient, that was one scenario. I want to see if it affects change in the whole, patient type. And so I get where they're coming from, right? And we're just trying to merge those and work together and figure that out. But it's really having to blaze a new trail, right? Because the system wasn't set up that way. The system is more about big pharma coming in and getting with the endowed chair of, Sloan Kettering or somewhere and putting something together and setting up a study and then going to clinicaltrials.gov and applying and moving forward. And that just is, and that's worked, right? In most cases. But I think if we really want to get back to health, we got to start way back at the beginning. We got to go back and question what's making people sick. Where are we getting? Why are these numbers increasing? What's in our environment? What's in our food? What's in our daily lives that's causing our neighbor and our cousin and our sister? I tell people every day, you're one day away from being a patient. You really are. You can think whatever you want. And that's to your point that you said, the shareholders are eventually going to be patients. The companies themselves have people that work for them that are patients, And so I do think that at the core, pharma wants to help patients. I do. I know that on the surface, a lot of times it doesn't look that way, but it is a business, right? And when you're in that role, You're looking for the best option to put out there that's the most convenient, that fits the supply chain that patients can take. And so sometimes some of those things become a little more of a priority. I mean, most patients, they want a pill they can take every day, right? An injection once a week or a month, or an infusion, or a fecal transplant or something. A lot of those modalities don't fit our daily lives. And so, sometimes things get lost just trying to create an administration path, and so.
And I think and this is why I think it was so great to have Ty on here. First of all, again, not met him in person. He may be actual AI generated. I don't know yet. So, but, and it's a joke, obviously. But, I think what you just said there, people that, I've met a lot of patients, they are a little bit repulsed by their pharmaceutical industry. But you said a lot of things there. And I would imagine a lot of people that are in that group would go, oh, whoa, that doesn't sound like anything I would have expected somebody to have been in that industry for several decades to say. Because, back when it did work, we didn't have the disease that we have today.
Right.
So now the disease that we have today, where they, basically have those basketball events or whatever, and those that have cancer are affected by cancer, the entire auditorium stands up. That system doesn't work for what today is. And so now that system is basically the people that need treatment today can't get access to it until tomorrow, when they're not here tomorrow and they need it today.
Right.
So, and this is where I think we need innovation in the developmental process as much as we need innovation in the idea and clinical aspect of it. But I want to jump in here to the fecal transplant, because obviously that's part one of this, and then we'll get into the second part, which I think ties in to that. But go ahead. Do you have something to say?
Well, one thing to add to that, I mean, diseases are smart, right? I mean, bacteria will figure out efflux pumps and resistance mechanisms. Cancers will figure out ways to be resistant to therapies. And the problem is, the process to get a drug approved is years and years and years. And so you can have a drug that just, once it makes it out there, when we were in conceptualization of it, it was very efficacious, but over time and exposure, bugs and disease states get smarter. They can outsmart these therapies over time. And so I think that the industry does have an altruistic motive to help patients. It's just by the time you get out there and can start selling it, sometimes those therapies, those disease states get smart. I mean, they can change, they can move. Tumors can, especially in the bacterial world, bacteria can figure out ways to be resistant to antibiotics. You have multi-drug resistant organisms, DNA gyrase and efflux pumps in bacteria can pump out the antibiotic and survive. So it's pretty interesting in that sense.
Well, good pivot point, because cancer can do the same thing. In many ways, it behaves similar to how you might see infectious disease. And then obviously, there are infectious diseases that cause cancer, right? H. pylori, viruses, Epstein-Barr virus, hepatitis C, and hepatocellular carcinoma. So, I mean, even parasites have been linked to, class 1 carcinogens. But let's jump into the fecal transplant, because I believe it's, obviously, Ferring Pharmaceutical, that product is for infectious disease. But, Dr. Williams and I at the Williams Cancer Institute, we've been using it off-label now for about 3 years for the immune system in patients with cancer. But a lot of people may go fecal transplant. And when I talk to patients, Ty, it's so funny, because I tell them there's 3 pillars to our treatment. I tell them the first one's fecal transplant. The look on most of their people's faces, if I could see a cartoon bubble pop above their head of what they're actually seeing, I bet it would be quite comical. But, what is a fecal transplantation? What is a fecal transplant for patients that are listening?
Well, I think the thing about fecal transplants that people really need to know is the history of them first. I mean, the first fecal transplant that's documented in history was done in 4 BC. 4 BC, 2,000 years ago. a Chinese medicine doc named Guy Hong. There was an outbreak of a pandemic of dysentery, and patients were dying left and right of dysentery. And he had the thought process, well, what would happen if we just took the stool of the people that didn't have dysentery and fed it to the people that had dysentery? And it was amazing result. And like, yes, you think today, at least we can do it through a retention enema, or we can do it through a colonoscope or whatever. But in 4 BC, they stopped it with yellow soup. They actually just made a cold gazpacho from stool and fed it to these patients, and they healed them. I mean, it stopped.
I'm sure they took that down with some whiskey or something.
I mean,
so hey, you can at least get this rectally now, an enema or colostomy. Yes. You don't have to drink a soup.
And then, and interestingly enough, as the timeline of history goes by, so the next documented scenario was 500 years later in the Middle East. They had an outbreak of cholera, and somebody had the idea, well, we'll just take camel dung and feed it to the people that have cholera, and it stopped the cholera.
It worked.
And so, they knew they were onto something, right? That bacteria in the gut, if you can balance it out in that dysbiotic scenario where you have this overgrowth of bad bacteria. In modern medicine, it didn't come back until around 1958, where they started doing fecal transplants for pseudomembranous colitis in patients. They would get a family member's donor stool and give it to them through a colonoscope, and it would work, and moved on. And then the advent of C. diff, when NACLs changed the naming of it, but Clostridium difficile infections came along, and that had been around for forever. I mean, hospitals, it's so funny, I talked to gastroenterologists, oh yeah, in my residency, we used to go down to the micro lab and take the family member's stool and put it in a blender with D5 or saline and blend it up, and then take it back up to the EP lab and give it to them, and they'd go home and their infection would be cured, and so on and so forth.
Right.
And then,
which tells you real quick, Ty, never blend your protein shake from a blender that you've gotten from a lab.
Yeah.
Because you don't know what else has been in that blender.
Or don't take a returned one at Walmart. Buy an open box one. Don't buy an open box one. Buy a brand new blender, because but yeah, I mean, I think that that FMT world kind of, blazed a trail, and thank God for the stool banks when they were out there, because they really spurned that innovation, and thank you to all these physicians that would see these scenarios and be like, hey, there's something to these FMTs, maybe we need to look at this a little closer. And in that historical reference, going back about 12, 15 years, Pharma did start really looking at the FMT world and trying to look and map some of that. And so, what they found was they've really mapped out 2 phylums. Bacteroides, that phylum is the cornerstone of the immune system, and Firmicutes, that phylum is the cornerstone of the anti-inflammatory cascade. But there's so much more of that onion that needs to be peeled back. Short-chain fatty acid producing bacteria like Bifidolongum, Bifidobrevae, Akkermansia, all these different species that are short-chain fatty acid producers seem to be really, they use the vagus nerve to build a neural network to the brain, and there's a gut-brain axis, there's a gut-kidney axis, a gut-liver axis. I mean, there's some exciting things out there, different health systems doing fecal transplants in different disease states, and they're still research-based, but they are pioneering the space for the future. So it's really fascinating.
Yeah, and we can just go all over the place, because I believe that the gut microbiome is critical to preventing liver metastasis. I would propose even maybe brain metastasis. I think, obviously it's through immune system, but I also think it's through the impact of the microbiome exchange. But I want to touch and dive into some of the research, because I think that's what really we follow. We lead with the evidence, and we follow where it goes. And we've been exchanging a lot of studies back and forth since we met. and it's really kind of spurned our friendship here. But I sent you one, and then we'll talk about one you sent me just the other day. I sent you the TACITO trial overview, which was just published, and it was a phase 2 randomized, double-blinded, placebo-controlled trial. They were looking at fecal transplantation in metastatic renal cell carcinoma, which that tends to be a hot tumor, an inflamed tumor, which I think is important to understand because that means the immune system is actually in the tumor immune microenvironment, and so it's engaging with the tumor, but the tumor is restraining it. It's inhibiting it. But let me go through real quick, and then we'll talk about it. They enrolled 50 patients. They did basically randomized 1-to-1 fecal transplant or placebo. Thought this was interesting, and I want to talk to you about it, is they did a baseline week 12 and week 24 transplantation. So it wasn't just one time. Looking at 1 year progression-free survival rate in the fecal transplant group versus placebo, the fecal transplant had progression-free survival at 1 year of 66.7% compared to 35% in the placebo, and the median progression-free survival was 14.2 months in fecal transplant arm versus 9.2 months. The overall response rate in the fecal transplantation group was 52% compared to placebo, 28%. They, of course, showed it to be well-tolerated, no major safety side effects. Ty, fecal transplant, basically doubling the response. It doesn't look to me like they looked at overall survival in this.
I don't think they had the time frame to do it, but
progression-free survival and overall response. I mean, that's dramatic.
It is.
That's dramatic.
And I found it interesting.
Why hasn't it not been picked up more?
That's the $64,000 question, right? I mean, I think
that's the $64 billion question.
Well, I was just using my old TV reference from game shows, but yes.
Okay.
I mean, it's a tough one, right? Like when we look at, I think that pharma, kind of picks and chooses its battles, and the microbiome has been a space that they just find really hard to figure out as far as supply chain, storage, delivery. Because in the study, I found it interesting that they did the first FMT by colonoscope and then the second and third by oral capsules. And so, which is interesting because I guess if you're a purist, right, you could argue what would that look like if they did them all under colonoscope or they did them all with live bacteria, even rectally, because when you get into capsules, you're looking at, lyophilized or desiccated or, freeze-dried scenarios of stool, and they have to go through first-pass metabolism of the gut. And so are they as efficacious, or does as much bacteria get engraft? I mean, that's still a debate, right? I mean, not to choose a side at all. I'm just kind of pointing out the space. And so, but for pharma, that's kind of some of the hurdle, right? Is the monetization of that. How do I get that and then choose the right modality for delivery and be able to cost effectively get it out there and make it available, and then have a supply chain where it doesn't degrade or have a short shelf life. And so I think those are signs of the hurdles that of the Rubik's Cube that they're trying to solve. I don't think it's that they don't want to go down that path or anything. And at the same time, you have so many other modalities that they're looking at, like gene editing or gene therapy. And so I think that, it's all who they talk to and what they decide to invest in. And so, but I think that for me as kind of a microbiome guy, regardless of my position or whatever, I'm passionately in this space because I believe from what I've read and the people that I've talked to that the gut holds that key, right? It is where we see even just like effectiveness of other medications outside of cancer. If you have a bad gut, right, you have no secondary bile acids, your absorption of even the medication that you're trying to take to treat the disease that you have is limited in that space. And so you see that if your gut is balanced or symbiotic, you have so much better of a path to efficacy in that sense. But yeah.
During the day, I'm a doctor taking care of patients via integrative oncology, bringing the future of cancer care to patients today. But at the end of the day, I become a potential patient. My wife becomes a potential patient. My family, my grandchildren become potential patients. And because of that, this quality of supplements that I choose are important. The sourcing, the manufacturing, and the quality. And that's why I recommend Nutritional Frontiers. See, they are a family-owned company that actually has an FDA-registered facility to produce GMP products. Now, this all became real clear when I was diagnosed with a pheochromocytoma, causing my blood pressure to go up to 300 over 130. And as a result of that, a surgeon said the only way to cure this, because medications would not, and to keep me from stroking, was to have my adrenal gland, my right adrenal gland, removed. And he told me, you won't miss this. Your stress response will be the same. Well, maybe I live a life of different stress than others, because let me tell you what, I miss that right adrenal gland, as does my stress response. So what I do with Nutritional Frontiers is Nutritional Kit, Adrenamax, and Super B Complete help me to handle the daily stress lifers and help me not miss that one adrenal gland so much. So I encourage you to check out the description below for my affiliate link to learn more about Nutritional Frontiers and how you can empower your family to handle the stresses of life. And you kind of touched on this, that the gut microbiome, and it's not just about the bacteria, right? There's a gut microbiome, which includes a lot of different things, virome and other things, but it's the gut metabolome that's a product that, well, you mentioned the bile acids, you mentioned earlier small chain fatty acids, and that's one that often gets mixed. It seems to me that, there's a problem with communicating, because it is fecal material that's being transplanted. So almost like there's the opening scene, fecal transplant. It's like, well, I don't know how to craft the narrative to get this out there to the general public, to the doctors, to medicine. So it's almost like they don't know how to craft that narrative, if you will, to break that opening scene, because people just seem to struggle to even get past it. But because this was just one study that was just published. By the way, check out the show notes. You'll see all the references there. But this is not the only study that's shown that. Again, there was a 2023 looking at fecal transplant plus immune checkpoint in melanoma. It's been shown in melanoma and non-small cell lung cancer. So this has been shown in humans with cancer in multiple cancer types.
And I think it's back to what you alluded to. You kind of have to disassociate the fecal side of that and really think more about the bacteria, right? Like the bacteria at its core, we're just getting it out of the feces, right? And so the thing is that I think you have to really acknowledge that you have 100 trillion bacterial organisms in your gut. It would weigh 9 pounds. Your biome would weigh 9 pounds. Think about that, because bacteria are microscopic, but there's so many there that all those tiny little microbes would weigh 9 pounds. And then I think the other thing is you have to realize that you have 10 times more bacterial cells in your gut than human cells in your body. And I think that when you look at that, it's this, I liken it to a Cameron movie like Avatar, where there's this ecosystem where everything works together, right? Like you can connect to the soil and to the root system of all these trees and all the different things in the environment. Well, the gut's no different. Like, I almost think that if you talk to a lot of like bench guys in the microbiome world, they would almost tell you there's no bad bacteria or good bacteria. They're all essential, just in their right coliforming unit space, because their interaction creates metabolites and amino acids and peptides and all these different things that feed or begin from the gut microbiome. And it just makes every little system in the body work. I think that it kind of has to go back to that core, and then you got to think, where I get my biome from, right? Like, I think that's what people don't realize. I think they think you're just born with this gut microbiome, and you're not. Like, you're born pretty sterile. So that vaginal.
We'll get there. We'll get there. Hold
Yeah,
that
okay.
thought, Ty, because we'll get there when we get to your food emancipation. But I want to touch on this part because you're critical. I'm actually writing a series of blog posts dealing with that concept of seeding. So just hold that thought.
Yeah.
I think it's important. It's not just about augmenting immunotherapy, okay? Because that is just, I mean, it's like the tip of the iceberg, but the tip's not even above the water. That's how early this process in science is. That's why it's incredibly exciting. But you sent me an article talking about using fecal transplantation for immune checkpoint inhibiting colitis. So here it's actually about preventing, or here it was treating colitis that was a byproduct of immune checkpoint inhibiting therapy given systemically. So you actually sent that article that says, okay, it's not just about augmenting the immune system, but it's about treating the side effects of the systemic immunotherapy. And it was like, holy cow, it's, for lack of a better term, both ends.
It is.
Treatment and side effects.
Yeah, the bacteria are so key to the development of that thick mucosal layer. They play a role in that, and that's where they live, right? So if that mucosa, you've heard the term leaky gut, it's when those splotchy parts of that mucosa thin or they have gaps. And if that's not fluid through the whole space, that bacteria doesn't distribute right throughout the mucosa. And if there's those gaps, they either can get into the peritoneal cavity and there'll be toxicity to that, or they get pooped out, right? Or they're exposed to gastric acid or what. And so it's kind of like the scenario of when you build a solar farm in the Midwest, right? Like you destroy the sagebrush, right? Well, the sagebrush is where the grouse and the quail live, right? Well, if their home gets destroyed, they're exposed to predators, they're exposed to the elements, they die off. And so it's kind of that same scenario. It's like you have to protect that mucosal wall. And so, yeah,
it's a ripple effect. You're describing, with the grouse and everything, the sagebrush, you're describing, I think, something that's very visual that people might understand, because that same ripple effect of the gut microbiome ripples systemically, because it's, you get breakdown of the endocrines, the gut epithelial layer, you get systemic inflammation, and it just ripples everywhere. So it's not something that's just confined to the gut, but it's throughout the body. So let me ask you a question, Ty, because in the pharmaceutical industry, where you're right, there's a business, they have the answer to their board, their stockholders, they can't just lose money, they can help patients and make money. I believe both of those can occur. In my opinion, where I'm looking at the science, and I'm wading through this crap every day but if you're receiving immunotherapy for cancer, my opinion is the science is pushing very fast towards these two statements. Number one, if you want to augment your immune therapy effect systemically to achieve its best outcome, you must get a fecal transplant. Now, I think the question there is how many? I do think that more than one is probably required, especially for advanced tumors. But then if you're receiving immune checkpoint inhibiting therapy, why wait for the adverse colitis or other toxicities to accumulate or rear their head? Why not prevent them by doing a fecal transplant? Let me give you an example real quick. One of our, I don't tell our patients when we do fecal transplant what symptoms they might experience in terms of benefits. I tell them, here's the potential side effects. And I said, I want you to keep or take note of other things you may notice. And I have actually had several patients with chemotherapy-induced peripheral neuropathy, Ty, and I did not mention it to them once, that they said that got better after a fecal transplant. So what that tells me is if we're going to reduce adverse side effects, why not proactively prevent them rather than waiting to react to them especially if that same treatment can actually augment the immunotherapy efficacy. So in my opinion, if you're receiving immunotherapy, both for the effectiveness as well as the prevention of side effects, I think fecal transplant should be, quote unquote, standard of care. What's your thoughts on that?
Well, it's a tap dance, right? I mean, because there's no FDA approval for FMT, right? Like, it's kind of Wild West. That's a research use only space, and doctors, that's why you're a physician. You in that space, you get to make those decisions, right? So FMT doesn't have any guideline or FDA approval for fecal transplants.
Right.
And so that space, I believe, if you read the science, I would, my personal opinion, I would agree with you. I think that day's in the future. I think there's still some stuff that needs to onion that needs to be peeled back, so to speak, in that sense. But I think that when you look at the restoration of Firmicutes species, you're helping reduce inflammation, right? That bacterial species or phylum controls the anti-inflammatory cascade. And so that's proven in many papers. And so, and then Bacteroides, that phylum, it improves immune response. And so, but yeah, I mean, you see it clinically every day. And so I would tend to yield to your experience. My personal opinion is, from what I've read and seen, the signals are there. I mean, they're hard to argue with around the country in a multitude of scenarios.
The reason why I asked that question, Ty, was not to put you on the spot. Was because there's a lot of debate amongst patients and social media about, we're seeing innovation, but we're not seeing it on the regulatory side. And what that does is that creates a bottleneck. Mm-hmm. And so I think we need innovation of ideas, and fecal transplant is one of those on the clinical side. But what we have is an old system that really slows down that innovation actually getting to patients who need it today. So, and that could be a topic of discussion for a completely different podcast of how can we innovate in that space?
Well, I would tell you,
how do we bring the different players to the table and say, let's innovate here, guys, come on.
Well, I would tell you this, this administration is trying to open up the doors to innovation. Dr. McCarry, they've created these new pathways for unmet medical need. And I think they get it. I mean, they question the system, but they also are like, hey, let's open up a path to expedite some of these scenarios. And so I think that they are trying really hard, more so than any other administration prior to. I think they want to try to open the doors to try to expedite new therapies and new disease states and unmet medical need. And I think that, health shouldn't be political, right? Like, everybody wants to be healthy. They want to be well. And so I think that if we will, kind of embrace that concept across every space, we all want to be happy and healthy. And I think that we're getting there. It's such a uphill kind of battle, right? We want to be safe at the same time that we bring new therapies to market. We want to make sure they're safe. I mean, Pharma wants safety first. They do, because, and even safety over, and I hate to say it, but efficacy, in the sense that you want it to be a safe therapy to take. And so, and I think that's why it takes so long to get a medication out there, is because you want to prove its safety first.
Well, that's why a phase 1 study of the phase 3 process with the FDA is, it is safety first. Mm-hmm. And that should be, hey, first, do no harm. Mm-hmm. I mean, it absolutely, so that principle, people would, I understand the frustration of the regulatory process. I think we need innovation there. That doesn't mean we tear everything down. Exactly. It just means, how can we innovate in that space? That may mean that, hey, this part of it's fine. This part needs innovation. that doesn't mean you tear the whole system down, because I think that phase one safety first is consistent with the Hippocratic Oath. And so you're right. I believe that there are people in government right now that are really working to change, and I think hopefully restore the impetus and the focus of medicine back to its purpose. And what I hope comes out of this is, Ty, that it creates new relationships, strengthens and develops new collaborations that I think hopefully will bring us that new innovation in that regulatory space. But what we got to keep, what we got to return to doing, I think, is not shut down people that we disagree with. That's where politics is gone.
Yeah.
Science is about the open debate and discourse of ideas.
Right.
You and I could. You're in Oklahoma, right?
Right.
Okay. Are you an Oklahoma Sooner fan?
Actually, I'm not. I'm married to Sooner, but I'm actually an Oklahoma State fan. I graduated from Oklahoma State. But I like the Sooners.
Let's just theorize with your wife. Okay. I'm a University of Tennessee volunteer fan. Okay. The last couple of years, Oklahoma Sooners and UT Vols have had some very good football games and a lot of drama and emotion about that. But at the end of the day, I could say to your wife, hey, we're going to be friends, but we can differ about where we have our allegiances.
Right.
What's happened in medicine and science, it's like, no, we're different, so we can never communicate. We can't agree on anything. I think we need to come back to say, hey, your interpretation of this study is different than mine. But you know what? At the end of the day, let's find the commonality there that we can work together and see how we progress this forward and help more patients. We got to break free from what I think are the shackles of politics that have really, I think, set medicine back.
No, I agree. I think we focus so much on, being right. And I think if you would listen to everybody, you and I could have a conversation and, probably 7 out of the 10 times you're going to be way more right than me. But maybe the one time I'm right about something, it might innovate you to think about something else. Or even if I'm wrong about something, it may spur you to educate me or to question a path and find out more about that. So I think if we can set those differences aside and just have discussions, I think discussions get us so far down the road, even when the opinions are a little bit different, that we and I'll give you a point, an analogy. Recently I had a big debate with a physician about bacteria, and we were talking about food, and he was like, fiber. And he was like, bacteria love fiber. That's how we're deficient in fiber. And I'm not a clinician, but I asked him, I said, well, that's interesting. If bacteria love fiber so much, how come if you go to any hospital in the United States and you walk down to the micro lab and they're trying to grow bacteria, why do they grow it on blood agar? Why don't they grow it on fiber? If fiber is so great for bacteria, why do we grow it to see if it will grow on blood agar? I would argue that bacteria love heme. That would say that, look at, red meat might be more important to a diet, arguably, especially grass-fed, no glyphosate, grass-finished beef. There's transvasitic acid in that. It increases CD4, CD8, T cells. I mean, hell, we're spending millions of dollars to try to make CAR T therapy when red meat increases T cells, So I think that fiber is good for the gut. However, that balance, what is the balance? Because maybe heme is just as important as fiber. I mean, I don't know.
But see, is that, because what science, is it okay if I bring you back to talk about the food emancipation? Because
no worries. Anytime.
This is great. Yeah, because I think that would be a great second part to this podcast. Because I could, I think you and I could talk about a lot of different things and just keep going on and on and on. Because science is it about right or wrong, or is it about asking a question, instituting a strategy to answer that question, and then following where that answer takes you? Right. Yes, you have a hypothesis. Yes, you have a sense of what that is. But if your hypothesis turns out to be right, does it make you right, or does it just mean that your hypothesis was generated on solid data and you were theorizing what would happen, then you conducted the study and repeated it and others repeated it to verify that it just showed, hey, this was sound science. And, so the concept of, the science is settled. I don't know that the science is settled on everything.
I don't think science will ever be settled.
That's what I say is it's unscientific that science is settled. And I think that's a means to squash debate. And what we need to do is engage with more debate, and intensity in debate is fine. Is fine. But it's okay to disagree by discussing the science, because the outcome, the benefit, the purpose is the patient. We just have to follow the science to get there to help the patient and not understand. I think that, political left, political right, political middle, they own the right or wrong of science. I just think that I think that's where we've gotten into in medicine. As I told you before, I always have a plan for a podcast. I had no idea we were going to be getting into politics with this, but, and again, this is not a political statement about what side of the aisle I'm on. I'm following the science wherever it leads to help patients.
Absolutely.
Politics don't get in the way. Help us. Be our partners to help patients. Because guess what? That's going to make them happier to vote for you.
Well, and I think of the sense that I want to help everybody. I want people to never be sick, right? And I think that's where, if we understand the gut, we can go back to the core of what you put in the gut. If you can make sure you put what's going in the gut clean, closest to the source, and the right scenario, then your likelihood of becoming a patient in any scenario is a lot less. And so I just think that, and I want everybody to hear it, right? And I think it starts at the core of food, and not in, so it gets, it's its own podcast, because you're talking about sourcing, how you cook it, what you cook it in, brands, Gross, generally recognized as safe chemicals. There's just soil microbiome, on and on and on. Because I guarantee you and I could sit down and I could feed you spaghetti and eat spaghetti me, but we are eating it differently, right? It's still spaghetti, but yours is, out of a box or processed, or you're making it with different ingredients than me. And our outcomes will be completely different. As far as our health, it's insane. But
well, that is a great transition to what we'll talk about next time, Ty, which is seeding the gut microbiome. And again, I've talked about seed to soul, which is the seeds from the soil are what seed our soul, but it's through the gut microbiome. So I think that's going to be a great conversation. This is a good pivot point to when you come back, we talk about the work you're doing to actually seed the soil of our gut microbiome by restoring the actual soil that our produce is grown from. So Ty, thanks again for joining me. Now, I know you're in the pharmaceutical industry, but if people that were following or listening or watching wanted to find you, are you on social media? How can they find you? Is there any information there that you're willing to provide?
I'm not a social media influencer. I don't want to be in that role. I am more than open to talk to anyone. You can post in the notes, my cell phone. I love talking to people. I love, people can call me. They can call me, I'll give you my number.
Well, and his work, the work that Ty's doing and what we're going to talk about next time, I think is going to really be careful about that, because you might get a lot of phone calls.
Well, I don't mind it. If they'll be patient, I'll get back to you. I promise. I will talk. I want to, I'd fly a lot. Literally every week I'm on a plane, and my wife's, I'll come home and my phone will be sitting on the counter and the phone will ring, and she was like, "Who is that?" And I was like, "Oh, I met them on a plane. I gave them my number." And she's like, "You keep giving out your number to people." And I was like, "Well, I just want to help them. And I always tell them, I was like, take it with a grain of salt. What I say, I'll give you stuff and you make your own decision. Read this stuff, read the same things I've read, go, for me, like part of the reason I found you, if I read something, I try to call the person that wrote it. I mean, my background was in investigative journalism. If I read a paper on someone, I will try to talk to the author. I mean, I have read papers and hounded people until they talk to me. There's a Stanford cardiologist out there. She's working in congestive heart failure. She's amazing, Petra Mamek, that she's looked at how the bacteria in the gut affect the ejection fractions in congestive heart failure. And I read a fascinating paper about her use of probiotics in those patients, and I just thought it was profound. And I wanted to know more that wasn't in the paper. Like, what led her to believe that? What made her think that to even go there? And I probably tried to get a hold of her for like 3 months. I sent her emails. I called her office, and then finally one day she actually picked up the phone. We had a great conversation, and I learned so much. And to me, I just want to learn as much as I can in all this, so I can help people get there.
Well, Ty, you have the heart of a physician to serve, and you have the curiosity of a scientist. So that is a unique blend that I think more physicians need. Thank you for joining me, Ty, on this podcast. I will put that in the show notes. So if you want to reach out to Ty and call him, and I can actually attest, he will respond. And so he's doing that to everybody he gives his number out to. You may have to get somebody to screen your calls, Ty. So I'll get you back. I'll get you back to talk about food emancipation. As exciting as this talk was, I mean, I get excited about fecal transplant. Call me weird and call Ty weird, but I'll tell you what, it's the future. But the next conversation, I think, is really much more one how we heal, how we restore, how we change our stewardship of that which we've been provided. Because what we've done, Ty, and we'll talk about this, is we are reaping the disease that we've sown because we destroyed our soil. So I'll bring you back for us to talk about that. Thank you for joining me on this Prescribed by Dr. Nathan Goodyear podcast. Really need your help. Subscribe to the podcast so we can get this message out there, so more people can learn about fecal transplant as it relates to immunotherapy. I would say even chemotherapy, preventing, reversing the adverse side effects, and yes, using it for the indication for Clostridium difficile infection. Also, we encourage you to share to those that would benefit from this as well. We need you to like it, as also give us a 5-star review. Thank you for joining us again, and we'll bring you back to talk to Ty about food emancipation. Thanks again.
Thanks for joining us on this episode of the Prescribed Podcast. All references supporting this episode can be found on the prescribe.com website. That's pre-scribe.com. To get your next dose of medical innovation, make sure you subscribe to Prescribe. We'll see you for your next refill.